All right, everybody, welcome back to episode 16 of Bolt Action 3 podcast.
It's
All right,
finally out.
we're going
Almost.
to, it is soon to be released. We have snuck into the 7 layers of Warlord games. We were able to retrieve a copy. Few people were killed. I was badly wounded, but we were able to get out and get this thing open, cracked open, and get on the tabletop and play some games with it. We are excited to talk about those big changes and our initial thoughts of that. We played probably over a dozen games. We've tested through specific mechanics, and we want to talk about all of that today. But as you know, before we get into that and we kind of highlight how we're going to discuss that, we want to go back to our normal section, who I will turn it over to Windhurst to introduce.
Thanks, Kentuckian. So, as always, we start with our alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. Big one. No episode last month. Kentucky and I agreed when we started this, kind of most of the way through our first year, that during the summer, inevitably we're going to be so busy that we just can't pull it off with work and family commitments. And last month was the month, so July. And so, sorry if you missed us, but we are back. We have episodes planned for this month, next month, and hopefully for the next couple. Get us through the end of the year without any more interruptions. And then the only other caveat I'll add, and I'm sure Kentuckian will expand upon, is for this episode is we're not going to do a deep dive. We're just going to give you our thoughts, and we might do that deep dive later in the future or something like that. But Kentuckian, turn it over to you for your alibis, caveats, and piggybacks.
Well, we don't really have anything since our interview with Charlie. It was a great interview. Really loved how it went. He was awesome to have on. Me and Windhurst both, were just really, really excited, and it got us really fired up to talk to Charlie. As somebody who, is just in the hobby for the right reasons and doing a lot of good things over there at War Games Atlantic. I will say you glossed over, it is a touch point with alibis, caveats, and piggybacks on. You have been somewhere, my friend, that I'm going.
That's
Where
true.
have you been since our last episode?
Yeah, so as if you follow my page, I try to share photos of interesting historical sites. But the wife and I went to Belgium and then up to the Netherlands and then back down. So I got some good World War One, World War Two historical sites in along the way from Bruges, Ypres, up all the way through Antwerp, up into the Netherlands. Went to Arnhem, went to see the whole perimeter where the fighting was around Arnhem. There's a really good museum, and I know that's where you're going. So I'm going to give you a list of a couple of the places, must-sees, and a good restaurant to eat at.
Awesome. Yeah. So in speaking of that, just like Windhurst said, big decision for me was get to go do historian duties in Market Garden 80. Super excited to do that in September, and go to Nijmegen and Eindhoven and all those great places as well, and see everything that he did and kind of dive in there and participate in this ceremony. So that was awesome. Again, like I said, glossing over the War Games Atlantic episode, really couldn't ask for more from that. It was a great episode. The only other kind of big things that happened are I went to NashCon here in the last week or two and got to play in that tournament. Was able to come out second. Just got really lucky. A lot of nastiness was out there on the tabletop, to include myself. I was joking with. I took a Gurkha army. I should, if you're listening to this right now, you should be saying shame. And I kept joking with some of my friends that I've never played Gurkhas. I've had that army painted for about 3+ years, and it has never seen the tabletop. And I didn't even play test it before I went. And I joked with one of my buddies who came down there. The Dark Knight, as most people have seen that movie, the Batman movie, with Harvey Dent, where he's like, yeah, you either die or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And so that was like, I became the thing that I despise, is this just OP Gurkha player. I don't think had a super competitive list. They weren't Gurkha paratroopers, and I didn't have the complete DACA stewards and everything else. But it was a lot of fun, and I knew there were going to be a lot of good players there, so I kind of just didn't want to get hosed off the table. Really great opponents, good games. There were there was one thing that we all kind of fell back on was the tournament had about an hour to 2 hour breaks between rounds, and so we didn't get done with the tournament until like 8 9 o'clock, and that was a little. When I was in the moment, it was really great because you got that when you make it to the third table on that day, no matter where you've been, your mind's kind of mush, and you had a little bit of delay. But it when you're at a convention, that kind of it was I would say I wouldn't like to do it that way again, just because couldn't go play an evening game that night and couldn't get a um, to do the other activities at the convention.
It's a
But a
shame.
lot of great fun. NashCon was a blast. I really highly recommend anybody who's in the HMGS, like historical miniature gaming, the South, Mid Southwest, and all of that stuff, even South. Like it's worth the drive. A lot of great games. They had that Johnny Con, which is Johnny Reb 3 going on. I saw Doug Glover. He's doing his BRS tournament. It was amazing. Rob Prince, one of my good buddies, won the Blood Red Skies tournament, and he won them with Italian biplanes. I don't know the full details of how he won that, but Rob is an expert player in any game system he plays. He's the owner of History. Highly recommend that company. Um, Keith Sullivan, Phil from Sherwood War Games. That's another good thing about the cons is it is a small community, and so when you get out there and you start meeting the people again, Corey with Cigar Box mats, Cigar Box battle mats, like it is just a great community. It was good to see Chris at Phalanx Consortium, like all of these people, Battlefield Terrain Concepts with Doug, like they are Adrian with his company, and I bought a new ancient rule set from him. I think it's Wargame US, something like that. But a lot of great people, a lot of great times. It was just love conventions for that, in the sense of we're dispersed here in North America, and it was really fun to go around and see everybody. And then the only other thing that I have is got once we were done with the conventions, my old man stopped by my house on the way home, and I got a good game in of Hail Caesar biblical, right? My Assyrians versus Israelites. That's the first time the Assyrians have been on the table, I think, ever, and
Did,
they destroyed my Israelites.
who'd you play as when you and I played? I played as the
Me,
Israelites. Who'd you play?
yeah, Philistines,
That's
dude,
right.
Goliath,
That's right.
man. Um, but it was really it was honestly, we've used chariots a few times, and I've played a bunch of biblical chariot games. My Egyptian army is needing a revamp. I need to redo a bunch of chariots for them, so I haven't put a lot of chariots out there on the table. And my old man played an early Assyrian army, and those chariots just the 4 horse, like those chariots are a tiger tank. You should roll Assyrian 4 chariot fear when you're on. They are unreal, and they can shoot bows and stuff. Nuts. But I won't bore everybody. That was just, we want to give you a place of where we're at right now. We're both super busy with work. Windhurst didn't even mention it. I'm sure he'll talk about it in his scouting report. But his follow his page, his stuff on wargaming, and what he's doing to bring that to the forefront of military strategy is pretty impressive. So keep following his page, liking his links, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But without further ado, the price of admission, why you came, right? In this episode, Windhurst and I are going on patrol into the unreleased world of Bolt Action version 3. Um, we're coming to this episode, and I want to make this very clear. We're coming to this episode. We've dove into the 320 pages of the brand new rule set. We've played a dozen games of the new mechanics, new scenarios, new rules, and what do these changes mean for the community? Is this still the game we've grown to love, or to some degree like to complain about and nag about, even though it's really mainly our strategies when we fail these games? Or do these changes, do they add the icing on the cake, or are they overcorrections and have a catastrophic effect? We're going to talk about these changes and just our thoughts on them. And we're not going to line by line read the rules. You have to buy it. It's a great rule set. I already am going to show my hand. I highly recommend it. It is really good. There's some stuff that is going to. I've been playing the other version 2 and version 1, and I've been playing, for a decade plus. And it was like getting a new relationship, right? There was a lot of times where I would have private conversations with Lynn Hurst where it was like, man, it just doesn't feel right. It feels like I'm cheating, or it feels like I don't know what I think about this, or I don't know what I like about this. And we want to talk about the newness of it and what that means for the game, the new effects, new mechanics, new rules. So find out all of this and more on our brand new episode. So grab your spear, your shield, your musket, your belt-fed machine gun, or your order dice, and let's move out. So Windhurst, I'll let you take it away with the first section that we're going to talk about with the new rules.
Thanks, Kentuckian. Yeah, so before we get into a lot of how we felt about the specific rules, I like to take a second to talk about the book itself, or at least how it's laid out, how it looks, and I felt Octoon Panzer was a very impressive book that they came out with, and they definitely took the lessons from that and applied them to this book. Kentuckian said it's 320 pages. Second edition was 228, so they've beefed it up. I mean, the historical fluff in the beginning section is now 40 pages, verse 19 in second edition. And me, who's predominantly a historical wargamer as opposed to tournament player or a casual player, I like having all that historical stuff in there. And it is packed with pictures. I'm talking illustrations, diagrams, photos of painted models. The kind of stuff when you're a kid and you're looking at your first wargaming book and you're like, oh man, this stuff is so cool. I can't wait to play with armies that look like this. And that's the only reference you have. It's a phenomenal book because you've got those battles and that history reference right there to get you motivated, and the multiple paintings and illustrations, which are an excellent painting reference. Kentucky, what are your thoughts on those?
I like exactly how you put it. I didn't, and notice, audience, I didn't say I completely agreed. I think that the historical fluff, to me, I think it's a penance that every tournament gamer should have to read that section before they get in it. No, I like the idea. I think me and you are kind of simpatico in that sense, as we do come to this from a historical mindset. We enjoy being steeped in the history. That's not every wargamer that picks up whatever tabletop game they play. And we like the idea of kind of being nested in that. And when stuff in the game makes sense for how it would in the historical aspect. There were a few nods that Warlord did when they changed the rules. And they've said that during the intelligence reports, like the DACA Stewards and stuff. This doesn't make sense, like it's not historical, and here's where, a vehicle is halved. Like, there's a lot of odes to that throughout the book, right? You are playing World War II, theatrical World War II in some sense, but you are playing World War II. And so I just thought that was an amazing kind of addition. The index, right? That was the biggest complaint that you saw from everybody in version 2 was, where's the index? I can't find these things regularly. It's there. I will say, again, this is weeks out, very close to the release, so we're not getting really too much of a sniff at it. So I haven't had time to really need to use it or tabbed mine out just yet. But it is a good kind of thing to have. And I love the idea that the book has so much meat in it that version 2 doesn't have. You have whole sections that we'll talk about a little bit a while from now about optional rules. The scenario part has grown so much. The armies have grown so much. It's got a few, what I would say are kind of like standardized forces at 1250 in there, like the God of War Russian one. It's got a lot of great things, and there's pretty detailed explanation, and the charts are still there. And again, when you're firing like above places and how you would look like that, and mapping it out with line of sight, all those things that we still have known to love, where Bolt Action has done it right. I just think they've gone above and beyond. So we're not rating it. We're not doing a full deep review right now. We're just talking the newness, right, and some of the big changes. Because again, we're still recording this before the release, so
but
this is a appetizer.
Not to sing the full glory, though. One thing that I felt was maybe not as good as they've done in previous editions was their diagrams. Now, let me clarify that. I'm speaking specifically in the art style they chose to go with. The diagrams, there's a huge number of them. They are very clear and concise, and they make it very understandable. But they changed up the coloring, and they went with a very specific art style. Like this is a almost like it's in a manual. To me, it kind of felt like it reduced the resolution and the quality of the image a bit. It was just personally, is like I kind of preferred the way they had that laid out in second edition than this edition, but that's purely an aesthetic complaint. I don't think it makes it harder to read the diagrams at all, but it was something that really, like, if we're talking about the visual appeal of the book, that stood out to me at first. Like, oh, what? I don't know how I feel about that. But then it's like, oh, all the information's there. It's still clear. I don't know if was there anything in the book that just kind of, the layout wise, maybe you felt could have been different, or was it to your liking, Kentuckian?
I really don't have any knocks. My only knock would be the idea that it's so big.
It's big.
When something is that big, when it's 320 pages, it's going to take you a minute to get to that section. And there are times you memorize the page and rules that you need to know. Like I know HQ and what we're talking about in version 2 is page 84. Like if there's a question that comes up, or near observers and all of that stuff, it's page 84. And I just don't have the same domain knowledge that I had with that. So there was a time where, hey, this is a question I have. I'm playing the new rules. I need to see what they look like. And okay, what page do I go to? And there's 3 pages of outlined, right? And how everything goes and what's in the book. And it's like, okay, first 50 pages historical book. Okay, section, the specific question I have is shooting. And that's just, once you get familiar with the book, I'm sure 320 pages is not going to seem like a lot. But for right now, that's just like, man, it is well worth the price that I think they have on it. Whatever it is, 50, 60 bucks, I think is what it's looking like it's pre-ordered for. And I just, 320 pages is a steal for all the information you have and everything else. And I think the diagrams, I don't really have any strong opinions on that. That might just be the Air Force versus Army in you showing like your nice manuals. And
It needs to look good.
I'm used to more kind of bluff. Hey, this is what it looks like. But again, the images and everything else they used in there are really cool, really kinetic stuff, and that's what you want out of a rule book. We've talked on this several times when we've reviewed rule books. Is what does it look like for? Does it get you fired up to want to paint that army or play that army, and is it dynamic and all those things? And if you've got like barely tabletop standard miniatures in your book or scenes or terrain, then it doesn't get you fired up. But this one, in my mind, it checks all the boxes. It's awesome. It is a fantastic book.
Yeah, my last couple of thoughts. I know because somebody might point this out. So when we reviewed Achtung Panzer, I complained about the number of images and stuff. Like sometimes it felt too much. In that, there was often material that had no relevance to armored combat that was in the book. I don't have that feeling here. Everything that's here as far as images is relevant to the game. So I don't feel like any of these images are wasted space. And to Kentuckian's point that it is a big book, one thing they continued over from Achtung Panzer that they didn't have in second edition is referencing pages constantly throughout the book. So like when they mention in a later section, they reference another section, they give you the page number to go to if you need to go back and refer that. So yeah, it might take you time to get through it, but I think that's very nice of them to help us navigate the book easier.
One especially, and we've talked about this, where systems compound on each other, and you have such a dynamic system with the order dice, with shooting, with the cover saves, all of that stuff. You need those references, right, to kind of go back and forth to say, hey, what's going on? Again, I think most players, even if you're casual, you're going to play this system a lot, and it'll become old hat. But again, that's the greatest thing about the index is you do have kind of a land nav map to go by. Any other things on the books before we move on? The book.
Nope, I think that's it for me.
Okay, again, we're not giving everything away here. We just wanted to talk our kind of first swashes at this, and so we wanted to talk Army Special Rules. One of the biggest things that you've heard from online and everywhere else is there's no free units. So I'll give you a feel of the special rules, but what does that mean? Two of the major five, which are included in this rule book, all of the big five, right? You've got Germany, England, America, Soviet Union, and Japan. And they're all included in this book. And so it's two of the major five from the last game had free units. And you've heard, hey, no more free units. We're not doing free units. So what does that mean and how is that equated? I think overall with the five armies, the the army special rules for that faction are going to feel real similar. They're going to feel that way. They're going to be almost the same. And in my personal opinion, they're going to be improvements. So let's just start with like the biggest changes is the no free units. So England, going to England first. They had a free observer. If you bought it in the rules, it was going to be 100 points from version 2. So that's 100 points free with a devastating effect, with pins and possibly 4-inch templates and some destruction. And naval observers aren't in here yet. So what does that mean? How has England been kind of fixed with no free units? Well, the biggest one is, and I'll kind of scroll down here to my notes that I wanted to talk about, artillery support. So when taking a forward artillery observer, when you buy one and you're in a British kind of England Commonwealth Army, you get a free strike, an additional free strike. So think of the American rule from version 2, where you got 2 airstrikes if you bought the observer. It's basically equated to where if you take that FO, you're going to get 2 artillery strikes, where every other nation would just get the 1. You're going to see 2, because when I started looking into that free rule, I was like, okay, how much is it worth? Because most of the time the rules, like the extra machine gun dice or extra whatever, what is that worth, and what does that mean on the table? And the regular artillery observers are 75 points. You're going to see a reduction of some of these special units, tanks and armor, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's pretty awesome in my mind too. And then it's going to matter. It's going to sound super overpowering, but it's going to matter too when we talk about pins, which is what artillery observers do. And so now let's talk our Soviet brethren, right? What does that mean for their free unit? So the biggest thing is it's called For the Motherland, right? We all remember that you had a special rule. It's not called For the Motherland in version 2, but basically free 12 inexperienced models that were on the table that we're going to equate to basically they were 8 points apiece. So it's almost 100 points because 11's 88 for inexperienced models. And, you'd go to town. So you're at like 90 some points that you get on the table for free. So taking away that restriction, what do you get with a new rule or a new kind of feel on that? For the Motherland is an inexperienced unit has a 50% chance of losing a pin if an enemy is in within 12 inches before taking an order test. So similar, it's got some feel from like Vengeance and some of the old British special rules that we'll know. But the idea is you're out there, you've bought a free inexperienced unit, it's starting to get pinned. If you have an enemy within 12, you can roll, right, a 50% chance, 4, 5, or 6, you're going to lose a pin even before you take an order test. So that's going to make your inexperienced guys a little bit more effective, and that's going to really help them out for what they're cheap, And in my mind, that makes perfect sense. One of the big Soviet kind of historical flavors in World War II is you do have a horde. If we look back at any of the battles with Stalingrad, Kursk, the Bagration, like you have the manpower of the Soviet Union has a lot to do with that. And so that kind of, I wouldn't say pushes you, but if you want to take advantage of that rule, you're going to need some inexperienced troops on the table. And that's a great way to kind of highlight that. So those are the two that I think really address the free units that we've seen. Again, France isn't in this rule book. So who knows what we're going to get with the artillery pieces that they get, the free stuff that France got in their additional allies book. But initiative training, going back to Germany with the buzzsaw and initiative training, that's going to feel pretty standard for the extra machine gun dice. And we know that HMGs have the extra dice. MMGs for them, they have the extra dice across the board. So that's going to be pretty effective. The Blitzkrieg rule with snap to action, um, it's going to be, I think, a little bit more simplified for second and first lieutenants falling into. You get 3 dice from them when you pull their dice. So like they're able to activate three units, and then captains and majors you get 5 dice. There's a little bit of lumping together, and the games I played were at about 1,000 points, which I know the new standard is going to be kind of 1250, which is hinted at from Warlord. It's in the book and those things, but I will say it never was major in my games. You have to have that huge point, or at least have your army set up for it. But that's going to be cool in the sense that those officer ranks are kind of grouped together now, and what their effects are. With the Americans, we had this rule about moving and shooting, right, and fire and maneuver. And so addressing that, like, how is that going to change? You've seen Warlord's post where they talked through shooting, and they talked through, taking away the modifiers but adding cover saves. And so it would be very powerful if you've only got a few modifiers for shooting, and the Americans basically, lost one of the 4 modifiers or whatever the small number is now. And so they've taken the new fire and maneuver and kind of, what I would say, is added the rapid fire rule to it from the British. So every 3 men shooting a rifle or carbine, you add an extra dice, and that gives you a little bit more, obviously throwing more lead down range. And that's probably pretty similar. That's what the M1 Grand and all of those weapons kind of went to, and especially the magazine-fed carbine. You've got the ability to kind of fire and maneuver. It's a tie back to the historicalness of that army and what they're trying to effectuate out there with the American weaponry on the table. So it makes perfect sense to me, and I think it fits squarely in the rules with trying to get there. I will say, when I was, how do these rules affect us and these changes? When I was coming up with my American Army, I played a lot of my airborne in my demo games. I played 1 game, I think, of regular American infantry. And for me, in the airborne, you want to kind of kick people in the face, and you're going to take a lot of Thompsons and stuff like that. You want to dig in your normally veteran infantry. And so it made me start thinking in my list, like, man, if I could take another rifle, I could use this rule set. So that's a good challenge, I think, to have. And it's a good way to kind of, how does this special rule tie into my army? Same thing with the rest of the American rules are going to feel very similar. The modern communication, -1, doesn't apply to you for rolling in from reserves. Air superiority, you get the 2 air strikes, pretty standard. And then gyro stabilizer, veterans, no penalty. So kind of normal feel of what we have. Going back to the English and the Commonwealth, artillery support we talked about. The other rules, they have the same 5 rules. They're not exactly the same. Up and Atom, Blood Curdling Charge, Tough as Boots, and those. There was one that really kind of spoke. I'm going to bring it up here real quick. So the Up and Atom, basically you had the ability to kind of get that charge off. And the one now is, if you fail the order test, measure the range, and then you get a reroll. So it's not like automatic or anything. Blood Curdling Charge, everything else feels very similar. You get the Tough as Old Boots, you get the extra die roll. The Rapid Fire is the extra die roll, similar to the maneuver for Americans. You kind of got to pick that rule. And then Vengeance is very similar in the lose the pin if you're within 12 away. So all of those feel pretty similar. I would say take a look at Up and Atom, but they're a little bit nuanced in there, but kind of those same 5 that we've grown to love, or that you've seen in the national characteristics of the British Army. Those are still there and have the ability to kind of plug and play with. Other ones, going back now to Soviets, Great Patriotic War, still there for you dirtbag Soviet players that have beat me in games on your failed reroll. I've tried to wipe a unit off the table and you get another crack at it. That's an awesome rule. I think it's super powerful, and it definitely counts when the player has really good shooting or really good HE. For the motherland, we talked about kind of favoring the inexperienced infantry. Not one step back is the normal commissar kind of rule that we've seen throughout, where you get those, you get that shot if a commissar's near your infantry that's failed. And I believe it's a caveat in there, has to kind of be experienced, inexperienced. Mass batteries is again very similar. Bolt action version 2, you get the feel of you get the 2 dice roll for your artillery barrage, and you take the highest one. All of that's pretty kind of standard right here. Warlord's not taking a great game and totally just slicing and dicing it. To me, all the nuances seem pretty good. To end here with Japan, 3 pretty big rolls for Japan. Death before dishonor. Everyone is fanatic, and infantry and artillery units auto pass morale checks when be assaulted by tanks. That's awesome. I have seen that come into play in playing a U.S. Marine player and stuff like that, and so that allows you to really be dug in like a tick and fight to the death. Which, based on historical accounts, whether it's Okinawa, Iwo, or wherever, that really has some historical flavor to it. So I love that rule. Bonsai, it's just a reroll of a failed assault charge, not an auto pass now, and so I really like that roll. Pins, again, if you're still thinking of version 2 and how pins affect the way units maneuver, I'm gonna just say put a pin in that. No pun intended. But we'll talk a little bit more about what the effect of those things are. But Bonsai, I don't think is strictly as broken, and maybe it wasn't broken because I gave Japan a really good option in version 2, but it makes sense with how the rules and mechanics work now. And then the last one is show your loyalty. When a Kempeitai officer is near a green unit that rolls its green roll, you can reroll the result. So basically, you take the D6 pins, maybe they still get upgraded. Maybe that's the reason of that unit being so motivated near a political officer on the front line. Those are, again, a kind of swash and a talk over the new rules, and the new army rules is what we're going at. We're starting with the base army rules. I really enjoyed them. I think they were great. I think they add the nuance, and I think they fit into the new mechanics and character of the game. Windhurst, what are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, so my experience is limited more to just the Americans and the Germans. Those are the only factions I have. It seems like the changes are, with the exception of just deciding they're doing away with the free units, the changes, like to the Americans' maneuver rule, is just because they changed other mechanics. It made sense to change some of these things. And I think that's what you're going to find. All the changes are not that they wanted to change the feel of these nations, but how can they prevent them from being broken with the rules they have changed in the game? Some of those things remain to be seen. When we talk about weapons and stuff, some of the weapon characteristics have changed a little bit, as far as like ranges and number of dice. So you might find you get bonuses in other areas as a part to just the faction rules themselves. But yeah, I didn't feel at first, my first thoughts with the American maneuver rule was like, I don't know if a couple extra dice, if you take a full squad, what's that, 3 extra dice? But really, with the way they've made the changes, you want to be rolling more dice. And I think they're going for a more hefty dice roll feel in the game overall, and that's just kind of in line with it. But yeah, I didn't have much of an opinion on the other factions, just because I've never played them. I've only ever played these 2. So I think Kentucky, that was a pretty good coverage of them.
No, good points. I'll kick it over to you for force structure, right? How does this, we talked a little bit about the new rules on how this army will play on the tabletop without getting into the detailed mechanics. What does the new force structure look like in platoon selectors?
Well, the rulebook's really good, and they give you some example armies to start with, and not just a here's a generic army, but like here's an army for this theater even. Some of the changes, I think Kentuckian alluded to, like even officers. There's not 4 tiers of officers anymore. They've grouped essentially your lieutenants together and your captains, majors, and above together. So they're just 2 groups. And yeah, and then it goes through. I didn't notice, for me personally, a whole lot of changes as far as the way they're broken down or the points. Can you notice much difference in the points?
Points are substantially less, obviously, on like machine guns. Light machine guns are normally like 20 points. There's some tanks in there that are super reduced. With actual, when you pick the mechanics, my biggest thing is the the standard. I think this will be the theme. Here are my thoughts. I think the standard for this, and it was revealed in the intelligence reports, are you have these 6 different types of platoons. Yep, 6. You have the rifle, the heavy weapons, the engineer platoon, the artillery platoon, armored platoon, and Reese infantry platoon. And it's walked through them. And so the baseline force that you get to pick is a rifle platoon. And it doesn't have all the whiz-bang gadgets that you're used to, right? Everybody's seen that picture where it's 1 platoon commander, 2 infantry squads is a mandatory. Then you can pick optional 2 additional platoons, a medic, a forward observer, a sniper team, anti-tank, light mortar team, and transport, 1 transport vehicle. And so where's my mortar? Where's my artillery piece? Where's all my stuff like that? The rule says that rifle platoon is the base. If you want to have the ability to get those things, you have to buy that platoon. So you have to buy an engineer platoon, right? That will give you 2 engineer squads and a platoon commander, and then you can pick from there, right? The engineering vehicles and those things. Or if you wanted to buy the artillery platoon, you have to buy that platoon commander and that artillery piece, and then you can kind of pick from there. The standard that I see in this is, I really like it. I think it has the ability to kind of, I've already heard people online talking about the spammingness of it, but I think it will still be true to the old game and the officer tax. So when I was running events and tournaments, people wanted to play theater selectors, and it gave them the ability to have, right, the old Stalingrad theater selector, which gave you like the ability to get 4 vehicles, like 2 tanks. And so if you played a platoon game, single platoon, and then you allowed theater selectors, you could get hosed, right? Because you could play these kind of kitted out, tooled up theater armies. And I got so many players who weren't doing it to be the devil or the Joker or this antagonist. They were just like, hey man, I like this army, I really enjoy it, and it wasn't an OP army. I was like, I want you to play that theater selector, like some of the Fallschirmjäger Crete ones. So how do you open that up and make it fair? And one of the things I did to attempt to do that was, you can play multiple platoons or you can play theater selectors. And I think that's kind of what Warlord is doing here, is like, if you want the toys, if you want multiples of the toys that you have, then you need to buy, additional platoons. You need that officer tax, so that way it can get it to you. Like the armored platoon, for example, is 2 vehicles, and 1 has to have the command special rule, or you can buy it and then another vehicle. And so it says in the rules, like, it can be an armored car and a tank. Well, by the very nature of that platoon, you can basically kit out to the old standard 1000 and 1250 version 2 platoons if you want, just by purchasing that platoon. The only catch is it's an infantry game at base. So for every platoon that you have, that's the engineer, the artillery, or whatever, you have to have a rifle platoon. And what does that mean? You're going to have this officer tax where you buy the additional officers, who are not as expensive, from what I remember, and then you have the mandatory 2 squads. So if you want to have 4 vehicles on your table, feel free, but you're going to at least have 4 infantry squads and 2 infantry officers, because you have to have 2 rifle platoons for it. So I really like it. I think it gives it a nuance that is kind of going back to how we corrected, people just playing theater selector versus generic reinforced platoon. I like the feel of it right now. And I have to be honest though, Windhurst, like we said, like I haven't played a lot of. I've played over a dozen games, and I've mixed and matched some of the platoons, and I've tried things. But I've already heard online like people are like, "Oh, I'm gonna have 2 or 3 infantry platoons, so I can just take a bunch of spam mortars and have like a mortar platoon or 2 mortar platoons or artillery platoons of like 5 pieces of indirect fire weapons." And that's probably possible, but I like that the officer tax and the platoon tax is there to kind of keep that stuff from getting out of control. Those are my thoughts. I'll kick it back to you for additional comments and thoughts.
Yeah, I know we talked about this before recording, and I don't. I know that's your concern, and I'm just trying to look again to see if there's anything that helps alleviate that concern in the way they balance the points. Like if it's just not cost effective to try and spam. And we could also see how they've implemented some of the other changes in the rules might negate, or hurt some of those concepts. Especially, if you're taking a bunch of artillery which, can't hold objectives and stuff.
Yeah.
Depending, a lot of that comes down to the scenario you're playing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The types of scenarios and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't, because I'm not a competitive player. The changes in this realm don't really bother me much, because I'm not worried about playing somebody who's going to, try and spam a bunch of stuff, because I'm playing mostly the historical games. But I do acknowledge that that is a concern, and it seems like Warlord has tried to implement some controls in there, but we'll just have to see, and that's the thing. People who want to break rules, as soon as they get their hands on this, they're going to go in there and they're going to try and figure out every way to break it. And we'll just have to see what comes out the other end from that.
No, I think that's a great point. I think going back to the kind of historical mindedness, I like that it matches what you would see in a platoon, and I like how they've tried to keep that. Yeah, I know guns and tanks kind of get pushed to the front, and sometimes I like the fact that they're going with a platoon leader or some type of lower officer that's like, hey, I'm in an artillery battalion or a company. This gun is being assigned to you. I'm here as the LT or whatever to help kind of direct in its use at the front. I like it, and it seems to open up the options for people that, try new things. I'm sure, there's some stuff like, just to your point, there's some people that are going to try to take advantage of that. I think with the officer tax and the platoon generic kind of infantry platoon tax on some of this stuff, it will have an ability to keep it low. It remains to be unseen. We need more data. And when we're playing these games, we weren't totally trying to break it. There were a few things we were trying to stress. So there'll be, it'll be interesting to see what the consequences are. But I overall, good marks on how they're trying to do this, get back to the historical feel of these types of platoons and going as a platoon to the front. Any other thoughts or anything on that?
Oh, we can move on to the next section.
Okay, this is the one that we'll spend a little bit of meat on, and what our thoughts are. And again, this is our just initial thoughts. The questions that we've got, try to compile them from other people that you're hearing about, talking about these new rule sets going on there. What does it look like? And so the thing that I wanted to bring up that will help with this, I think, is shooting. So the old rules, where have we been? You declare the target reacts, you measure the range and open fire. Roll to hit is step 4, roll to damage is step 5, target takes casualty 6, and then checks morale, right, if need be, if you've lost more than 50%. What is this? That's 7 steps. What does this new look like? It's 8 steps, right? It's supposed to be quicker, but it says 8 steps in the rule book. I think it is a lot quicker, but going through, what is the new shooting procedure? Declare target reacts, which is optional. You measure range and open fire, roll to hit, roll to damage, take cover saves, target takes casualties, and then target checks morale. So what does that mean on the table? So they've taken away a lot of the long range stuff. And I tried to really get into the math of this one. And Windhurst,
Claire,
had to suffer.
can you
Go
clarify
ahead.
that what you mean by they take away a lot of the long range stuff, just so it's clear?
Yeah. So the weapon system, and I have the example that I kept shooting at you, no pun intended. But the idea is the weapon system, the range that it gives you is the range, right? There's no long range in this game. And that was pretty awesome in a sense of a lot of people had, I'm shooting a rifle and it's not even over half the table. Why am I rolling long range? That should be somewhere in the effective fire of it. I think that makes it for the historical minded people that couldn't wrap their head around that. I think that they'll probably get a better feel of it. So let's talk a real game example of what we're looking at, and let's speak from version 2 and go to version 3. So I have a German squad of 8 guys with an LMG firing while they move at regular Americans in the woods 19 inches away. So they're shooting 11 dice, right? 5 for the machine gun and 6 rifles. One of the guys that's in the 8 is the loader. All of that makes sense. We're where we're at. Version 2, your base of hit is to 3. You get +1 for moving. You go to a 4. You get +1 for range because I said 19 inches, right? It's over 18 inches, which is the half the range in the old version 2 is the machine gun. So boom, that takes us up another 1 to 5. And then +1 for light cover. We're at sixes. So I get to roll 11 dice and I need sixes to hit. That's a 16.7% chance of hitting. And then I need fours to kill, right? Because they're regular American infantry. It's 50%. And then I'm done. We're good to go. So that same scenario, that squad of German just regulars just running out in the open, shooting at Americans that are in the woods. You're shooting 11 dice. Nothing has changed. You get the extra machine gun dice for the LMG that's in there. That's all well and good. And the LMG still is 4 dice. So the American buzzsaw rule applies. Um, Shooting the 11 dice, base of fours to hit. The new base is fours. So base of fours to hit. You get a +1 for moving. There's no other pluses. The only modifiers that you have in version 3 are firing on the move, -1, +1 to your die roll. Fire is pinned, -1. Fire is inexperienced, -1. And point blank range. Within 6 inches, you get a +2. Those are our to hit modifiers. So wow, if we've gone down to just 4 modifiers, we're not worrying about the range and everything. Well, then what does that mean for when we're actually going there? Fours, the only modifier that I said in my scenario is moving, takes us to a 5. I need fives to kill, or fives to hit, and then I'll need fours to kill. And we go through that again when we talked about they take the casualties. Now you do the cover saves. Roll to hit, we hit. Roll the damage. I got 2 of the guys, let's say, and now target takes cover saves. So what does that look like? Soft cover is 5 plus. If you roll a 5 or a 6, you got a 33% chance of surviving in soft cover. Hard cover, 4 plus, and down is 5 plus or a +2 save modifier, which we can talk about that a little bit later. But the idea is now you've added this cover save. Looking at fives, it's maybe the 33% chance. So you've taken the 2 hits, they rolled to kill. Now I roll fives to see if I can save one of the guys, and then we're off to the races, right? I'm reacting. I'm probably not losing that many. I'm reacting. I had initial. I was very concerned about this. To me, I was one of the people that was very. I don't know. Windhurst can tell you. I do not like this when it comes to automatic weapons. To me, this makes sense in Warhammer Ancient Battles, in melee games and stuff like that, because I think I'm moving my shield. I am, actively reacting to you. It was a bridge too far. September's coming up, so that was a good reference. It was a bridge too far for me to say, like, you can react. I liked how version 2 had it, and I was, anything they changed there, I was going to be very upset about. I do not feel that way anymore. I'm okay with it. It makes sense. It gives the defender or the person receiving the rounds the ability to get in there, and it puts the cover modifier from the shooting into the defender's hands, which I'm okay with. It's just switching to the other person and allowing them to basically use that cover modifier. And at the end of the day, they picked the cover. So if you wanted to roll, fours or something, you should have gotten that heavy cover. Um, and it still keeps the game kind of the other player actively engaged. I'm not a huge kind of critic of it right now. I don't really have too much heartburn about it anymore. It to me, and if you're one of the people that are, man, I hate cover saves, I can't do that. I would say play a few games, get your feet wet under you, and then be like, okay, this makes sense. It's not broken, especially with the weapons, the machine guns being kind of as devastating as they are now. It's simple, it's easy, not hard to use. Um, so the one other thing I wanted to talk about is pins in shooting. So pins, as you've noticed in the rules, right? It's not like a negative pin every time you have 8 pins or anything else like that. It's just -1 for pinning, for being pinned, right? It's not, you
Yeah.
can't have up to +6. If your unit has 6 pins on it, you're not rolling at a -6, which I like. It still keeps units combat effective. I initially had a little heartburn on that too because I thought that was the benefit of an HE round hits a unit and they got D3 pins on them and they got up to 3 pins. It's like, okay, they're probably not going to be shooting as effectively as a unit that just took a strafe round from a machine gun and got 1 pin. But to me, the way the mechanics work in shooting, it's fine. It makes sense to me, and it keeps it kind of streamlined and easy. And it's another way when we get to orders and we talk about down, how units are never kind of out of the fight in this game, which is good. The use of how rally works now, where you take the rally order and you lose all your pins, that makes rallying a lot better in case you were somebody like me who rolled a rally order and you got D+1 pin off because you rolled a 1, right? You're at 2 pins. That was kind of a waste of the order and probably not as accurate as you want in a 6 to 7 turn game when you're losing this whole unit effectiveness. And just it's not because I like luck, but that seems too swingy even for me. What are your thoughts? We just wanted to streamline and baseline kind of shooting what Warlords already talked about in the intelligence reports, and then we played through these examples of the shooting. Well, what does this look like? Let's see where the differences are so what does that mean for us? And those German machine gun in version 3 could be shooting at 35 inches, right? Barely in range, and still would have been rolling that. So I like that. When you think of an MG34, MG42 on the tabletop being that effective at that distance, 3/4 of the table, that's, in my mind, that's good. And so I'm good with the changes. I think they streamline into the game. Play it, test it out, buy the book, even if you're a doubter on cover saves, and get back to me. Windhurst, what are your thoughts on shooting in the new version?
Yeah, so I don't mind cover saves. I never had issues in the beginning with cover saves as the idea of putting it in the hand of the defending player. I like the idea of encouraging and rewarding players to think tactically and the use of cover. It feels like it kind of rewards a down order more if you're caught in the open. One thing I don't like that the base to hit went to a 4. I think it should have stayed at a 3 because I feel like that would have made it slightly more lethal, and that would encourage you more. That effect of rewarding good tactical play and use of the surroundings more if it was more lethal and easier to score hits. So I don't. The only part I got heartburn was after the fact is it going to a 4+ for the initial hit. I also feel the order personally. I feel like it would have been better had it been, roll to hit, cover, and then wool to kill afterward. Kind of be like, okay, well, I scored hits. Now, are they lethal or not? Did I take a guy out of action? To me, that kind of flow makes more sense. They also took away the exceptional damage. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yep.
Now, when we talk about some of the specific units later, I think that rewards the use of certain units later, like snipers, because those are the only times you're going to be picking out guys who are dying.
Yeah. I was going to save exceptional damage and the small team modifier for the next section when you talk about that.
Okay. Pins. I don't know. I'm I'm on the fence a little bit. It was always a mechanic that I was like, man, you get a couple pins on and you effectively can't do anything. You can't. You're never going to hit a target, and it felt very hard to remove enough pins to make it matter. So I kind of feel like that might have been a lot of people's problems, and they kind of overcorrected it. Like I think you could have left. Well, if they hadn't changed shooting to where there's fewer modifiers, then I think changing the rally to remove all pins would have always been a good fix. I don't know if that was needed now. Maybe now rally shouldn't take off all the pins so that you will still have that pin for the shooting, but it's all about the effectiveness of responding to the order, right? Because I know you were saying your thoughts on, their ability to put accurate fire. Well, now it seems like, okay, well, pins are less for that and more about their ability to respond to orders. I don't know. I kind of feel like you kind of get what I'm saying. Like they kind of
No,
too
no,
much stuff going on.
well, and I thought about this a long time because I think that's why, I'm glad we played games with it because I think my biggest concern was when you read something. I really like how Warlord did the intelligence reports. The snippets is kind of quelling the masses. It's showing them like, here's the thought, here's what's going on with your beloved only child rule set, right? Let's give you a peek kind of behind the mask. When you think about the minor changes, sometimes I had this feeling, and again, I'm like a monogamous rule set person with version 2. Like I was like, okay, these changes are good. I'm okay with templates. That's probably heresy for most people. But all of this makes sense to me. And I thought version 2 was one of the, it's gotten the highest score on our podcast for a reason. It's a great rule set for fun and for everything else. And when you hear the changes individually and you don't have the amount of playthroughs and stuff like this of seeing them how they work and the buzzword term of synergy, I was the same way I felt myself. And then now I'm like, okay, pins still matter. Pins, you've got the HE weapons that dole out pins. You can still evaporate units by pinning them out. All of that makes sense. But if you want to kind of streamline this game and get it tactically to where it's ease of play. And then one of the things that we saw that was kind of abused in version 2 were these kind of heavy MLRS type weapons, where it's the Nurburgrer, the land mattress, and all of these things, or big howitzer hits that just doled out pins left and right, and then you couldn't do, shooting was still something that was gone, or all these options aren't taken away from you. Those pins are still going to matter for your morale check.
Right.
But if you're lucky enough, or I mean your order test, but if you're lucky enough to pass that, like you need in a 4, and then now you're shooting, like it doesn't compound it. There's not cascading effects. If you pass that check, you have, for whatever reason, rallied those guys, and now they get a shot off, and they're at a -1. That makes sense to me. And when I think you see these things play out on the table in, connection with each other, I think that's when you can say, oh, okay, like this isn't totally taking it and going off in a different direction, or taking, what we see people do now is just taking a sound bite from someone and misquoting it. I'm good with how pins work now. I'm good with you passing that -6 order test. Yeah, you got to roll 4 or something, or a 3 or less, and you pass it. Yeah, dude, take the shot at just a -1. There's 4 modifiers in this thing now. That's fine. You passed it. You shouldn't be penalized 80 times when you're trying to activate that unit, and that, to some degree, is what it felt like for me. And I think the sweet spot where people really saw that was when your unit got up to 3 or 4 pins. You were like, okay, I can take the order check. Let's say they're regs. I'm at a 5 or less, or a 6 or less, and I need to pass. Okay, I've passed. Now I still have 2 or 3 pins on me. My fire, before even looking at range and cover, is going to be sixes followed by sixes. What am I doing? Why not just rally or do this? And it takes away this it goes in the inverse of what we were talking about. It almost seems like you're going to spend that turn rallying when the enemy is 6 feet away from you. When I think the average World War II rifleman would, one or two guys keeping their head down, shooting their rifles over the berm just to keep the enemy in a stay back. Feels good to me, feels natural. And I just think that when people kind of play these things out, they'll and continue to play them out. Like me, I no expert, dozen games, not crazy, but I feel like it makes sense.
Yeah. With that
I would,
though, I don't know if you noticed. So they reduced um, the HE pins. It's only D2 or D3. They got rid of the D6.
yep,
So they definitely
yep,
changed the focus of the pins mechanic. I don't think they changed it. It's the way it functions too much, but the focus and I think in how it's supposed to hurt you. And overall, I
yep,
like that. I
yep,
One of my big criticisms of bolt action in the past would have been having a lot of pins on units, and it's just like I don't feel like I'm shooting. There's no point in shooting, and the ranges, like Kentuckian said, they got rid of the, and they even say in the rule, like the maximum range is the effective range. The weapon could shoot theoretically past that, but this effective. So why would you penalize me for shooting at my effective range? Those were things
yep.
that really bothered me, and they've gotten rid of them and adjusted them, and I think these are good changes overall that I'm happy about.
And it just, even to your point, you're never going to make everyone happy
Oh
on
yeah,
that. I've heard a million people say, you're looking at like the 300 meters, 500 meters, whatever you want to say, effective range for a light machine gun in World War II, and you're like, it's still only 36 inches. I want to complain. I think it's a move in the right direction, and then everybody who complains, I think, about these rules or about the changes, how does it fit in the puzzle? The range and the effectiveness of the weapon is, if you're designing a game to be rock, paper, scissors, and you want to get it down to a streamlined, fun game you can play in 2 hours and not argue about everything or not go on a diatribe for an hour. We've all had that player, to include me sometimes, at the table to be like, well, actually, the Germans had this type of machine gun here. And I think it's there. I think it's good. I'm for it. I feel like I've had a lot of play tests on this because this is the main mechanic in the game. You're shooting and killing people. But I still um, I'm trending. I was one of the most negative Nancy's. I cried in my pillow into Warlord about cover save, or to Rob, my buddy here, Windhurst, about cover saves, and it's got me. And if I'm one of the most negative people on it, like, I think give it a chance, roll through it, and you'll see some stuff. And again, this is wave top, basically talking intelligence reports and stuff like that, and a little bit more of a deep dive on what it actually feels like on the tabletop. Before we move on to the next one, Rob, do you have anything else before adding to our next kind of major change in the game?
nothing specific with shooting pins and covers. No.
Okay, I'll let you take it over.
Okay, so kind of talking about some of the specific units. I didn't notice the small unit change in rules, so Kentucky can highlight that. But so snipers are more lethal now. They kind of bypass the cover mechanic entirely, and they're the only way you're going to be removing specific targets again. Now that there's no exceptional damage, so I think they kind of they're more lethal. I feel like snipers are more lethal. They added some special rules for infantry. There's engineers as a special rule. Fieldcraft, infiltrator are some new special rules they've added. Infiltrator, kind of being like a rule now for the units that you get to move at the beginning, like you used to, with your snipers and forward observers and stuff like that. Go ahead, Kentucky. You have thoughts?
I They are, they've always been a good kind of delete unit with exceptional damage. But just as Windhurst said, like, with that rule being gone, they still can pick, these models. They still can target the individual units. The cover save's pretty standard for V2, right? It had no cover save modifiers in there. The one thing too that made them very deadly in version 2, I think, is they had a small team, right? Two less than 3 men out there. You got your 1 or 2 models. That makes you a small team. It's harder to hit. If you're talking 6 modifiers, handful modifiers in version 2, that one's gone. That really saved them. That made the 2-man officer team. That's the only reason I took them as 2-man officer teams when I played V2, is to give them that small team benefit. And then snipers always had that. So if you talk cover and small team, you were, you're already looking at 5, 6s plus to hit them. And with taking that away, they're not as survivable in my mind as they were in version 2, which is a good thing. The infiltrators rule, where it's kind of beyond the 24 inches, or you're half of the table now, in some scenarios and those stuff, that can be very very good. A lot of more dynamicness out of the sniper in placement. And then I really liked just the old finish kind of rule has been revived here. They get a +1 when shooting, so it's a 3, right? The rifle range 36 inches, shot benefits additional +1 modifier to hit, and any hits go straight to damage, no cover saves, and benefit from +1 modifier to damage rolls against infantry artillery. So I really think they're good. I think they're in that sweet spot of where they were. People are still going to roll 1s and 2s, all right, all day long. I'm going to be one of them. But I like the feel of all that right now. Like, I think it's a good unit. Did you take a lot of snipers in version 2, Windhurst?
I usually took one for the same reason. It was usually worth taking because of that survivability of small team and for the dice and the points. And it was really good at plinking artillery or weapon teams. And I feel like it's lost some of that value because of the survivability, but now I feel it's more lethal in plinking. So I felt like my snipers never got kills before. They just might put a pin marker on somebody, but I feel like they're going to start putting kills a little. It just feels like, having not actually gotten to test sniper specifically, but it feels like they could be more lethal and getting those kills in. But I think it's a good balance. If they're going to be more lethal, then they should be less survivable.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. That's the first time I've said it this podcast. It's a good rule. I don't really have anything else to add to snipers pending your suggestions.
No, or any other the kind of individual teams. Yeah.
The flamethrower, to talk that one, that's the next up on our list. Is a lot of people have talked, hey, what does that mean? When shooting a flamethrower, roll a single die to hit. Normal, if you score a hit, it's turned to a D6 hits, D6 +1 in case of a vehicle. All of that sounds very familiar for us. The top armor, any unit hit by a flamethrower takes D1 pin markers because it's been hit, and further D3 for the unbridled terror. So all of that still pretty standard for us. A unit hit by flamethrower must check its morale once firing has been worked out. Regardless of the number of casualties caused, and even if no damage is suffered at all, a unit failing this check is destroyed. After shooting with an infantry man-pack flamethrower, roll a d6. On a result of a 1 or a 2, the flamethrower has run out of fuel. That's very key, right? Because version 2 was only a roll of a 1. It's gone. You had a 16% chance of losing your flamethrower after you shot it. I have many a time cried my little eyes to sleep when I rolled that 1 after doing crap all in a roll. So that hurts the survivability of flamethrowers. We saw version 2 a lot. If you play the odds, people were really abusing small flamethrower teams. One of the guy that just won NashCon, Brian Crew, played a army that had 6 flamethrower teams in it, whether they were in squads or teams. So that's kind of a good rule, I think. If you've got this heavy hitter weapon and this man pack that only has a certain amount of fuel into it, it probably should be closer to the 33% chance, right? And that makes, for us, the historical-minded players, a little bit more accurate. You're not just unlimited ammo, Grand Theft Auto cheat code, flaming everything, the whole board's on fire after you've just shredded all these enemies. So I like that. I like the 1 or a 2. And after shooting with vehicle-mounted flamethrower, On a result of 1-2, they run out of fuel as well. So I like all of that. There's an additional about um, they don't suffer. Also, flamethrowers don't rely on kinetic energy, target's armor, so you don't suffer a -1 penalty, um, nor the +1 pin for firing at point blank range. I like all of that. There is an issue where, they're going to have a pin when they shoot. There's that talk, but I like how flamethrowers, in my mind, I would say a little bit nerfed, and I would say nerfed in a good way in version 3. A way that doesn't make a spam army just go crazy. Doesn't make to where uh, you just see the 8 flamethrowers on the board, somebody taking 2 platoons or something like that. What is that going to get you? No matter if you hit, you're going to have that, high chance of hitting, but you got a 33% chance of losing that flamethrower team, and that's feels a lot better to me. What are your thoughts on flamethrowers?
Well, I don't know. I thought the nerf was a bit bigger because it's only a single dice to hit now. It
Yeah.
was 6 dice before.
Well, it's still
When shooting,
it's a single.
when
Yeah.
you
Once you hit, then you roll.
then you can find out about. But when you that initial roll to hit is a single dice.
Yeah, that's what it's always been. In V2, it was that as well.
Was it okay? Because when you look at the
Yeah.
charts, it said there were 6 dice to shoot a flamer on the
No,
version
so
2 shooting chart. Unless I just was reading it wrong.
no, and that chart again. Every time I've looked at that, I've gotten confused. But that one says in the rule book, here's me throwing shade at version 2 chart. But it's always been the one roll and then D6 hits if you hit.
Okay, then they've cleared that up as well. Then, so the weapons table now in version 3, because it is a single dice roll, it says it's a single dice roll. So that's good to know because never having taken flamers, that was very intimidating to see in the rule of 6 shots. But now,
Oh yeah.
seeing that, yeah. So for flamers, I didn't have much else. Again, not one I've taken. There were some other weapon changes though that I thought were interesting, like pistols don't count as assaults. Medium and heavy machine guns get 6 shots, 6 dice. I like that for heavy machine guns. That felt like I think it was 3 shots for heavy machine guns in version 2, which felt weird to me. Like why it's not like they're big explosive rounds. Some weapon ranges changed. They got increased. One thing that I think talking about weapons that might help reduce the chance of like artillery spamming is a lot of the indirect fire minimum ranges got increased. Meaning that, okay, yes, they might be able to take a bunch and be pounding you, which is historically how they would go, which means you've got to get under the guns now a lot more.
Yep. Yep.
And I think that's a good balance. So we might find as people do this and play that the new meta is, okay, well, if they're going to try and spam indirect fire, you just got to get under it as fast as possible. And not penalizing
I
you so much for the shooting might really help that.
I love that point, and that's such a good point. Most of the minimum ranges. You had a few heavy stuff that was like 24 inches was a minimum, but I think that's a perfect point. It was all like 12 and stuff before, and that's you got to be the Viet Cong, right? You got to get in the wire to really get after them. So I completely agree with that.
And then I mentioned HD. Did you earlier that they changed that? Did you have any other thoughts on that you wanted to?
Not HE and buildings and some of that stuff seems pretty similar. I don't really have like major takeaways. There's nothing like ground shattering, I think, with HE. There's a little bit of stuff in the diagrams that you'll see on templates and how they're placed, and to what they're placed, especially when you're shooting the, like auto cannon type weapons, is a little bit of a deviation from the start one. But I don't think it's anything that's like totally off the wall. And so no big effect for me right now. I played a few games with vehicles with autocannons, and I did my Flak 38 one game, but nothing that I see is off the wall. It makes sense to me, kind of streamlined, and just as they are in version 2, some of those tinier HE weapons like the autocannons are still infantry killers. So makes sense. No big issue for me.
Yeah, one thing, since we're kind of talking about this, that I thought was weird is in the weapon special rules. So, in the list of special rules, they list anti-tank guns and what that means, but no weapon has a anti-tank gun special rule in it.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it's intentional or are they just referring to like the anti-tank gun, like.
I I I think that was similar in version 2. It's kind of like an umbrella, like anti-tank gun term. That's kind of what I gather from that. I agree with you.
Because does it
It
apply to
leaves
like
some
Panzerschrecks and stuff as well, or is it specifically referring to like the artillery style pieces, anti tank guns?
anti-tank guns is what I see as the artillery style type
Okay.
pieces. The Pack 40, your M57, those things. Um, and the only place that I think that it kind of illuminates that a little bit more clearly is when it describes, it gives the example of what those things are when it's talking like, tank or vehicle and what falls under that. It says it there in a little bit more definitive term, but that would be my only. Um, but we'll keep moving on so that way we can. We're trying to keep this episode to a minimum, but we're wanting to at least get our first impressions and playthroughs of these new rules.
Yeah.
So Windhurst, I'll hand it over to you after I got done with Flamers.
Yep. So next we want to talk about smoke. Smoke had a kind of a big change.
Well, and indirect fire. You can say indirect fire
Yes.
because I like that conversation we had.
Yeah. Okay. So smoke now matches how indirect fire works. In version 2, right?
Boo.
If you missed your smoke rounds for indirect, then your opponent could place them. Now they're just gone off table, the same as indirect fire. I don't have any real issue with that, specifically because I had issue with in version 2. Okay, well, if my indirect round is missed but won't hit anywhere else on the table, possibly hit one of your other units or one of mine, then why would my smoke round do the same? That just bothered me because it was inconsistent. Kentucky, I know you have different opinions because of the way smoke works, and I think you're going to see smoke less on the table now. And so, but I think I kind of feel like Warlord wanted to not necessarily simplify, but just make it the same, because if it's an indirect fire weapon, then why aren't they making it all operate the same? I think the only downside to doing that is you're going to have smoke on the table less often.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. I like how me and you went back and forth on this rule a lot. And I'm somebody that doesn't play with smoke. You're somebody that doesn't play with smoke a lot. It's I saw it as the advantage in the best I've ever seen smoke utilized is by Japanese players with the knee mortars and getting the synergy within their special rules and the tools they have at their disposal to get into the enemy. So the quick diatribe on that is Japanese players, want to get in fast and quick and get to that fanatic hand-to-hand combat because they're normally going to win. They've got larger squads. And you could take those big grenadier squads with 3 knee mortars. You could take other type of mortars to lay smoke. And so the old rule, kind of a real crude synopsis of it is you aimed at a point, and then within 12 inches of that, the opposing player could move it. Well, you're not really doing a directional die. The opposing player is always going to do it's the most advantageous thing of against you. So it worked out in the ether, but smoke was dense terrain on the table. And it gave the Japanese player the ability to say, okay, there's 24 inches between me and this unit. I'm going to put the smoke out in the middle or maybe closer to the enemy than what he would like. So now he's got to think, where do I put this dense terrain that'll land on the table in between me and the Japanese player who's trying to cover this open ground or get to this place with me? I liked that sense of it because it gave that player a strategy, what they were going to do a charge. And again, even going to Colonel Cole's charge in Normandy, north of Carentan, they fire smoke. You got the artillery to fire smoke on that German manor house. So this is something we see in World War II pretty consistently when we're taking positions. And I like the idea to have it back in your toolkit, regardless of how you used it. I think with it dissipating. I was one of the kind of complainers of this change to Windhurst, and it was okay, but now smoke's not even a thought, because if you're gonna, unless you get a lucky six and it lands right where it's at, it's gone, right? The canister dug into the ground and didn't billow anywhere, or it's a dud, or whatever the case may be, whatever you tell yourself. So why would I have a 15% chance in a 6 to 7 turn game of landing right where I want, knowing that time is of the essence when I have to pull this charge off? So it kind of hurt my soul, because I've seen, I'm normally not a Japanese player. I have an army, played it dozens of times, and I've used it a few times in game, but it seemed to me like a viable tactic for them and a viable tactic in World War II, and it seemed to be off the table. And so me and Windhurst kind of, he was more of the, hey, it's congruent, it's consistent with how indirect is, and that makes sense when you're processing it in the game. And then so we kind of went back and forth on, well, let's just do what people have talked about or complained. And this might be me leveraging for a rule change, but you have a mortar on a table. You on turn, your first turn of ranging in, you don't get the six. I think it should go 3 or 4 d6 in a different direction, a directional die direction, and land on the table. And then the next turn, if you don't range in, it goes 3d6 in a directional die. And the next turn, if you don't range in, it goes 2 directional die in a different direction. That makes sense to me for the historical mindedness of it. But then I think Windhurst kind of pushed against that and was like, it's not consistent. And then I personally believe I agree with that. And I think that it could have some very unintended consequences in a game where you can't be ultra micromanaged, detail oriented in this game if at the end of the day you're playing a 2-hour game. You can get the feel and the flavor of theatrical World War II, but when you change, if you bring 2 or 3 mortars and you have directional dies going all over the place, then we're just playing whack-a-mole, and we might just roll highest die and see who wins, because you bring 3 or 4 heavy mortars and you do that, that's going to be lead to some very unintended consequences for either player, I think, and there's no really strategy into that. So it seems consistent. I kind of defer to that, and then I think that the unintended consequences at a 4-foot width table that mortars could do with directional dies is too much. It can be too much, too swingy, and that's something that would probably keep me away from it. So I'm good with the change as of right now. For all the people out there that are, they use smoke a lot, I'd be interested in your thoughts, on what you think of the change. Any other kind of alibis or comments on that?
I mean, I would have preferred in the artillery. You see it in almost every other game. If there's indirect fire and it misses, it deviates. And Warlord is the exception to the rule in the hobby industry. And it's a rule I don't like in any edition of war in bolt action that they've done. And because of that, I can swallow this pill on smoke easier, because that was a thorn in my side. Why is it like this when my indirect isn't? Because I feel like it should. I feel like there should be, if you want to call in danger close artillery, there should be a risk of it deviating on you. Stuff like that. I want that in the game. And I don't know, maybe I'm not the minority here in that complaint, and they're just like, fine, well, we're just going to make it the same. I don't know. I always thought I was in the minority, but it seems like they decided to lean towards at least the guys at Warlord was like, well, we're just going to make it the same now, instead of saying it's this way in this case, but not this way in this other case. I don't understand the rationale behind it other than that.
Well, and that's where I think the synergy of the rules. I think through your lobbying of that way of consistency,
Yeah.
You have opened my eyes to the unintended consequences of if it was directional dice. When you have a competitive game that's trying to be balanced, it has to be rock, paper, scissors. It has to be. For whatever detail, you can reward good strategy. You can players will go in there and fool with the metas and change lists and change components. But at bottom, you have to have kind of a counter to everything that you do in the game. And when you put 5 mortars on the table or artillery pieces or whatever, and you just start rolling directional dies in every direction, there is no game. That is utter chaos. That is templates landing all over the place. And so I see by the necessity of trying to have a decent balanced game that still rewards indirect fire on the platoon level, that's fair. And that's, it's not, it's just, you can't have every ability and rule and thing to be perfectly replicated on the table. And so that's one where I think maybe not perfectly replicated, but perfectly replicated to make a balanced game, and and historically flavored.
Yeah.
So we'll move on
Yeah,
to
move on.
beat the dead horse of indirect fire to down order. So down order still consistently a good order. Um, we talked about it. Down as a result of being shot, you receive the +5 cover save. Slight indentations in the ground, right? You're moving around. If the unit is both in cover and down, the unit uses the cover value for its saves as above, but also gets a +2 modifier for its dice rolls. So if your cover save is 5, who also goes down, you will need a 3 or more successful save, right? That's awesome. That means that you're in that hardened terrain and you're just hanging on. Really like that. I don't think we mentioned it on here, but these are the two big changes. Down being an effective way to shed pins, right? If you stay down, in version 2, it was the D3 pins, and here it's the pins, right? So a little bit of all or nothing on staying down. But again, you're talking about taking that unit out of a game of a turn for one turn. So you go down from 8 pins to 0 like that, but you're losing them for about 15 to 20% of the game. Good trade-off in my mind, 15, 16% of the game. Good trade-off. I like it. It's cleaner. It's smooth. It's not the D3 pins, which I'm okay with. I just want to sneak in rally here because we didn't have it out here, and we talked a little bit in shooting in the orders. Rally being the same thing. You pass the order check on the rally, you lose all your pins. I like it just because the same reason I showed you. I don't think pins are going to be great for pinning you out and negatively affecting your unit, but they're not going to make you. Pins could be swingy in version 2, right? You could have 6 pins and then you could roll off all of them, or you could roll off 2 of them, right? D6 plus 1. And I like the idea that this is a little bit more consistent, which gives the commander or the person running with it the ability to know what their unit is going to do and what it's capable of. Fog of War is still in Bolt Action version 2. It's in most war games. But I hate things that in a competitive or in a mainly competitive environment that are just really swingy that you can't even plan for or know that that's going on. I think this will give the players a little bit more of a base that if you're going to use that rally order, you're going to use that, you're standing up, you're rallying, you're opening yourself up to shots and everything, then it's rewarding you and it's making it a little bit more viable than knowing that you're like me and you get a D6 crappy roll and you only get the 2 pins off. I like that. I'm a fan of it. I support it. What are your thoughts on down order and rally?
Yeah, so I definitely like the rally change. I think that's a really good decision in the right direction. I mean, down though, it's still the way it sounded like you were saying. Correct me if I'm wrong, but with down, no pins come off. It's just the
No, they do. So if you retain down from going into the next turn in version 2, it used to be D3 pins. So just like ambush, version 2 is I went down because you shot at me with artillery. I've got 2 or 3 pins on me. Maybe I'm at 5 already, and I'm down. I'm close to you. I'm getting hedgehogged by 2 or 3 units, and I'm really running out of
yeah, I see
options.
that. Yeah, okay.
If you retain the down order, you lose all the pins, but you're still down for the next turn and you're hanging out. So you've burned your turn to lose all the pins, which I like.
Yeah,
You're
so
you're you're spending that turn to
yeah.
shake yourself off.
Well, tactically, I guess the reason so people understand why you would do that is if you're concerned about not getting a dice to put a rally order on them soon enough, and they could be gone. If they could be destroyed because of the number of pins on them, and you're like, well, they're already down. I need these pins to come off, or else this unit's gone. So tactically, it can help you keep units in the game. And I think a lot of the changes have been made to keep units in the game and keep them effective longer.
Yes.
And with orders, I don't know if we mentioned they changed the foobar table slightly. so that the friendly fire option can come up more often now. It's a 1 to 3 friendly fire, 4 to 6 panic,
Yeah.
which is an interesting change.
And people to this day still play that wrong, right? It's if you have an enemy unit within 12 inches of the unit you're shooting at, you don't have to shoot at a unit within 12 inches of you, but you can shoot at, the lines are kind of blurred. 12 inches is the distance for a close assault. So that makes sense to me. It makes that a little bit better chance of happening, which I agree with you. In World War II, me and you have talked about this a lot, as well, just like the historical accuracy. Fratricide is a huge part of World War II. It just is. When you have artillery with, map reading and everything else you've got going on, you've got machine gun positions. We have so many stories of friendly fire, and I'm sure hundreds and hundreds of more that are probably undocumented. And it's a part of the game and the automatic weapons and machine guns in close combat. And
Poor
I'm
communication.
I'm not opposed to it. I think it's pretty historically accurate and not opposed to it. And I like your highlight of that point there.
Yeah. No, nothing else. So if we want to move to damage tables, so damage tables in regular shooting didn't change, but the vehicle damage tables changed a lot. Well, sort of. Essentially, there's two charts now. There's the superficial and the full damage. So before, right, if it was superficial, if you exactly equaled the target armor value, right, you could only essentially get a 1, 2, or 3 on the damage chart. Well, now instead, there's an entire chart of 6 options for superficial. So it makes superficial more dangerous than it previously was in version 2. It's including, it added things like immobilization and weapons jams, things like that. And then the full damage table hasn't changed. So I think they made, it's given you, if the max damage you could possibly do is just equal that, there's more incentive now, I think, to try and take those kind of long odd shots at armor, because if you can just do superficial, it could still be game changer.
Yeah. And I like your point. Immobilized is always it's in the main damage chart in this one, but I like your point. And me and you have watched those World War II movies where the sights are knocked out or the treads knocked off. And the two ones that I love about the superficial table are engine damage and steering compromised, right? Like you can't turn or you go to the slow rule for the rest of the game. That's so true. Like, right, you shot out somebody's tire or you did that. It adds a different dynamic to where it's not just crew stunned, immobilized, or on fire. There's other effects of the vehicle in the game, and you kind of got to compute for that. And it doesn't make it to where if you just pass a morale check, you get out of it. Like in most of the ones when it went to superficial, you did. Like you could pass the on fire check and be fine, or immobilized, yeah, but it was pretty kind of boilerplate. The only one I hate, the only one I disagree with, is we always took it out of the turret jammed. A turret has the advantage it can rotate and face the target, but the vehicle suffers damage. It can become stuck in position, sometimes very annoying consequences. I do not like the turret jam rule. With everything else that makes sense and everything that we know about combat, it probably does make sense, but I'm just opposed to that, because in version 2, it was kind of boilerplated into a lot of the effects of striking a tank. But that's just a personal preference. It makes total sense that it's in there. It makes total sense that it's a component of the superficial damage. And to your point, I like the two tables. I like the fact that there's a little bit more of options if you hit the vehicle and what it does. Huge fan of that. Other thoughts on the vehicles, big changes?
I agree that the turret jam is worded a little odd. It kind of implies you need vehicles with movable turrets, or it's going to be kind of a pain to track. So kind of building off of Kentuckian's point, I like having that as a damage effect. It is a clunky thing to implement in a game where you don't have control over 100% of the models and the types of models, and it does add more bookkeeping, if you will, to the game, because it matters, like the direction. If they had said, well, turret jam essentially turns the vehicle into like an assault gun, that would be one thing. But it's like it matters the arc of the majority of the assaulting model, that it's taking basically damage from. Yeah, so it's that you got to kind of keep track of that. Um, I don't know. It's kind of clunky, but yeah, that was it for damage tables. Though I didn't get much any testing in with vehicles. But it didn't look like movements or anything really changed for vehicles or
No,
capacities of transports and things like that.
just the points, and without going into every detail,
Yeah, there's a lot to go through.
one of the biggest things that I'll just note here, and I think it'll help kind of tie that in, is a Tiger is a regular Tiger one is 330 points. These vehicles have been repointed, which a lot of the things in the game have been repointed to, I think, give a good balance and to kind of encourage people taking them. And then I think with the machine guns, this is the thing, right? You see somebody say that and hang on to that soundbite. What's 330 points? This thing is crazy. This thing is wild. As of right now, you don't see anything as far as the special rules of like Tiger Fear or anything else like that. That's wildly out there. I'm looking at it. It doesn't say an additional the Tiger Fear rule. Maybe that's done and dead, and we won't see that. But you have the big main gun on it, right? Which you're paying 330 points for a mobile, huge, just killer of souls. But you've a lot of the machine guns are halved, which they put on the shooting, and we should have talked about it probably a little bit in shooting for vehicles. So it's not this officially mobile pillbox either. I think the reduction in points shows the reduction in effectiveness, but also in the ability for that tank to mean something on the battlefield. Huge fan of it, and a huge fan of the way they've repointed it right now. And playing a few games, nothing seems totally broken to me. Gurkhas are still nasty, but everything else seems pretty straightforward. So moving on to the next one, we're going to talk scenarios. And scenarios are so big in this. I don't know how many pages that they actually take up. If you want to look that up, Winhurst, but the scenarios are so big in a sense of you get a lot of bang for your buck. There's two types of scenarios: story scenarios and battle scenarios. And so when we're talking about this, I'm gonna talk battle scenarios. So battle scenarios are you have these main options of things that you'll know, like seek and destroy, meeting, killing each other, keep positions, breakthrough, top secret, demolition, hold until relieve. You've got different deployment zones, which is the long edges and the quarters that we remember from sectors, right? And then deployment type, you have the meeting engagement, you have prepared positions, and you have fog of war, where you can come on from any table edge. You roll for the scenario for the victory conditions, you roll for the deployment zone, and then you roll for deployment type. I really like that because that allows you to play, with all those different options. You've got 6, 2, and 3 options that you can play in any manner you want, gives you a fair and accurate kind of game, and then based off the deployment type, just gives you anything that gives you more options and different ways to play the game. I think is a huge benefit. And when you look at something that's like, hey, you just gave me, you cookie cuttered this out of these scenarios that I love, these deployment styles that I love, or these victory conditions that I love, and you allow me to kind of pick and choose and play them the way I want. It gives you better feel. Maybe your army is tooled up for one type of it, if you're a competitive player, but maybe it shows you like, hey, this is how I designed my task board, and oh man, this puts me at a huge disadvantage on this side, or it puts me at a huge advantage. And it's a great way to think about that and just allowed that to play on the tabletop in strategies, because some of these things are not streamlined. We always talk about some of the games that we've played, Windhurst, where it gives us, we've played a variety of different, everything from ancients to modern, and different ways. When me and Windhurst play the games, we'll normally go like, okay, well, let's just bring on a division at a time. Let's fight a vanguard action, or let's try a different way like this. I really love that combination and that feel of, wow, this is just a new way to play this same game I love. So huge fan of the battle scenarios and what they did there. I really see a lot of cool options coming with it, and I know that they're going to add to it. I know that the third-party communities are going to add to, how you can make these things more effective, and I'm just super big fan of it. Without going through every detailed nuance of the scenario, they're very familiar. They're very true to bolt action, and when you can plug and play with them, I love it. I think it's great. What about you on battle scenarios? Any other thoughts or kind of comments on those?
Nope, they seem pretty straightforward. I think so. Building on that, talking about the story scenarios, the battle scenarios is a much bigger section than the story scenarios, and I think you're going to predominantly see in tournament play the battle scenarios. Would you agree with that?
I could see. I think tournament, you want it to be everybody's playing kind of on the same scenario, no matter if it's the same terrain or table, but they get the same feel. I wouldn't see a tournament, allowing everybody to roll for it. They might have something cookie cuttered where it's like you're going to play this scenario that's normally not played in the sectors, but everybody's playing it. You wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't. Well, and I mentioned that because I don't see story scenarios being played tournament, because it even says in the description for story scenarios that these are typically inherently unbalanced, right?
Yes.
These are meant to be more historically themed games. So, like, we had the Manhunt was a common one in tournaments in version 2, right, where there's an individual on the table that everyone's trying to capture. Well, on the story side, like, Manhunt is one side is the attacker, one's the defender, and the attacker's trying to capture maybe the highest ranking officer that the defender has on the table. And, that's not a balanced game. How you deploy. Several of those scenarios have hidden deployment, things like that, right? These are meant to be kind of more. These are meant to be scenarios in which you are encouraged to come up with a narrative for why. Why is this happening? And obviously, those are. I think it's nice that they've broken these down and they've given us these two options.
Yep.
For playing.
And it even says that, to your point, it even says that it's not supposed to be balanced. And if you want that, like, both, if you're going to play two games, players swap then to see like what was the feel of that. All those are pretty. Most people know them though. Envelopment, manhunt, point defense, land grab is basically sectors and surrounded. So really, really cool sense of scenarios. And like you said, other options. How can you beat that?
Yeah, that's all I had on scenarios.
The only thing that we're going to talk about now is additional and kind of optional rules. We talked a little bit about the changes from armies, and we talked about points, and we've talked about some of the other effects of shooting and all of these things and how they get to a synergy on the table. The biggest thing that I really love about this book, and it being such a huge book, I'm flipping right now to, they've got guidelines for which I don't want to steal the thunder. I want you to go and look at these air landing reinforcement rules they have in there. Awesome. If you're an airborne player, Currahee, 101st Airborne, it's really cool. Combat jump rules, those are all going to be, people are going to have familiarity with it. I know at one point between bolt action optional rules, what you were seeing in books, with the directional dice being placed, paper planes, there's all over the place as far as what makes sense to you. I really like these in here. They have the amphibious assault rules. They have sitting fighting, which you're familiar with, roads and open ground, sewer movement, command and control in a city fight, buildings, desert warfare, digging in, climate conditions, dug in, foxholes, trenches, gun pits, all of those things, that have been, they're standardized, right? And that was a problem with some of the theater books, is they were all over the place. Well, which minefield are you playing with? They have minefield rules, minefield sections, effects of minefields, anti-tank, dummy minefields, water, concealed, booby traps, clearing minefields. night fighting, weather, all that stuff, mud and monsoon season, for some of my Pacific players. All of those things, I think, hey, it's your one stop shop to go to and find those rules. And again, the breadth of this book is being 320 pages, is you are getting a lot. All right. It only has the big five in there right now, but we know Warlord is coming out with additional theater books. They're coming out with new Armies of book, right? There was a leak the other day where Amazon was posting, right, the Germany book is somewhere around the corner. So I really look forward to how they do those things. The biggest thing that I thought Warlord started to do really well with the errata, right? The errata got to a million pages, was how this is you're going to play in tournaments, what's going to be kind of the standard, and it looks like this rule book is our one-stop shop for a lot of things. So when you're talking the dug-in positions, when you're talking a lot of the nuanced stuff, it's I think it's a definite win for people that are okay. I'm playing the. I really think it's cool that it's a one-stop shop now for all these additional rules. I know units are going to push the envelopes. I know to give every player what they want. The historical minded, the casual player, those books, I'm sure they're going to open up the wide world of different types of units and selectors and everything. But super impressed with this base rule book and everything that has in it. I am a fan of the changes now. I haven't seen the deep, dark, under lurkers in the bolt action community abuse it yet. And I'm trying to search in my mind of like where the abuses. The platoon selector, I think, is done in such a way where the abuses are going to be very minimal. The way shooting works, everything. I'm still like I've never, and probably for other rule sets, I'm not going to be a fan of cover saves, but it makes sense to me and the way they're doing it and streamlining it. Everything to me, and this is me kind of wrapping a bow on it. I'm a fan of it. I think I highly recommend people to pick it up. I think whether you're casual or historically minded, you're going to get a lot out of these 320 pages, and you're going to have at bottom what I can almost guarantee is you're going to have a fun game, and that's whether you play it competitive or historical. You're going to have a fun game because that's bolt action. We've always said at bottom is theatrical World War II. It is the movie come to life on the tabletop, and with version 3, it's still that for me, and it's highly recommend. It's still to me winning my heart and mind. So yeah, highly recommend. What are your thoughts on additional and optional rules, and then tying a bow on it?
Yeah, so I mean, there's over 20 pages of optional rules, just to give you an idea of how many there are and how expansive, and they're broken down into big categories. There's also guidelines for if you don't have enough order dice, how you want to do that, multiplayer games, and everything to even playing on larger size tables, which is all great stuff. Especially kind of for the type of playing I like to play. One rule change that we didn't mention, and I just want to throw it out there. We don't have to get into detail about it, but there's a significant change to close combat, and that change essentially the way the dice rolling hasn't changed. Essentially, like how you determine kills and everything. It's just that it's now all simultaneous. So it's not I charged in and whoever, if you have anyone left now you fight back. It's all at the same time. And I've seen close combat make or break units, and so I could see that being a big change in the game. But there's so much good stuff in this game. Some changes I think are really good. Like that's as when I was talking to Kentuckian about this, how I feel about all these changes. I would say the vast majority of these changes are good changes. There's a few handful that I'm kind of like, they're happy to glad changes for me. I don't think they make the game better or break the game in any way. There's maybe a few changes that I was like, I would have done this differently. But there's not really anything that has changed in 3rd edition that I think has made the game worse in any way. There's nothing I was like, well, now this is a less of a game now because of these changes. They're either non-consequential as far as how I personally see them, or they're good changes. And I'm looking forward to getting I'm looking forward to getting some big games on the table with this. I think this is. I think we're going to see bolt action played more in those kind of big scale battles again. Maybe not big scale as in large number of models, but in more elaborate setups that you've traditionally seen other games kind of migrate to in displays and everything. Whereas bolt actions really cornered the market in our competitive World War II gaming. I think you're going to see a lot of people, especially with all these optional rules and the types of battles. I think you're going to see it on the tabletop a lot more often than maybe we had been in the past. And I think a lot of things that fans were doing to do those kind of scenarios and campaigns within their clubs is just made easier by adding these things. And like, I don't have any of the theater books. I was asking Kentucky, did he feel there was any consolidation from those books to this, apart from army lists? In these optional rules, do you feel like they pulled optional rules? Were there optional rules in the theater books that you feel like they've consolidated all that to one spot now?
I think they've consolidated. Some of the theater books handled different things completely different, and I think they've given you to some degree a like a buffet list of things that you want to pull that you can take from. But I think they've gotten rid of the inconsistencies that you had with theater books. So, if you brought the biggest push was if you brought two different platoons against each other and you were one was desert and one was winter, and like the way that they handled minefields or the way that they did this, it made sense for the scenarios in the theater books and those things. This seems maybe consolidated because you can't consolidate all these different ways of approach. Maybe standardize and still give you a little bit of a carousel wheel of options, but I like the standardization of it, and that's kind of what I think a lot of people had heartburn with, because different people wrote different books and they didn't treat these things the same, obviously, right? And this one, I like the standardization to still some options, but standardizing it, that gives you consistency and that allows you to play it across opponents, across competitive to casual events, and know what you're up against and know the roles that you need to beat for this minefield, what the density of is, where it's at on the board, how do you play it, and same thing with positions and the airborne stuff I really like. So all in all, I think from both of us, we're not going to score it because this is not a real
Not
review.
deep dive.
This is not a deep dive. But you heard it. Windhurst being, somebody who's not played the competitive circuit and is a good, historically minded gamer. He says it's only gone up. In my mind, it's gone up leaps and bounds. So I think you get a highly recommend from us right now. Buy it when it comes out. Amazing. It's going to be a lot of fun, and that's one thing I think you're going to have, regardless of how you play it, competitive or casual. I think it's a fun game. But we'll kick it over to our next section.
Yep. So that's the end of our bolt action review. So now, if you're still with us, this is just our last two sections, real quick. We'll knock out kit bag and scouting report. So for kit bag, we decided. Well in advance, we thought this out. Long time ago. Was not last minute at all. But we decided non-standard fields, right? Because you can buy hobby-made fields, but both of us use quite a bit of non-standard. What I use for green fields is AstroTurf samples. You can get these online in like packs of 3 of like square foot sections. And you can get different lengths and different colors. And these are just meant to be like, if you're looking at some video, you can get it to represent different, and they're already glued down on a black mat, and I just painted the edges of mine brown, and it works great for green fields. Kentuckian has an option that he'll show us for not green fields.
So the wheat fields are, you can't beat the doormat. Your kind of rough cut doormat turf that just dried. You can cut it into different sizes and pieces. I think it's amazing. I use it 15 millimeter to 28 millimeter, 6 millimeter even. I think it's amazing in a sense of cheap. We're talking about what's in our kit bag. It's super cheap. The only problem really with these mats is finding them without the
Printing.
fall, live, laugh, love, and everything. And normally my fix for those are going to Home Depot or Lowe's or a kind of a supply store where it has them uniquely. The only other kind of option I use besides teddy bear fur, which I just cut teddy bear fur into squares, and you have that. It's a super good one, a little bit more pricier. Is you can go to Hobby Lobby and get fabrics, that have it's got a flat back, but it's a little bit of a turf um, feel to it. And I cut these out
It's
for
like a
like
fleece
wheat
almost.
field. Yeah, wheat fields are huge, but it'll give me a little bit of a different dynamic. And I add those all the time to regular fleece mats on my table, which you can see the version 3 play testing has been going on pretty hard over there. But or not play testing, I would say walkthroughs have been going on pretty hard over there. But those things are super cheap, can help elevate your hobby. That's why they're in mine. And I mean, me and Windhurst, unfortunately, my wife's not listening, but we spend a decent amount of money on the hobby. And so if you can still get a great game, the aesthetic, we both like the aesthetic. And for pennies on the dollar, these are quick fixes that can turn a regular $5 or $10 fleece mat and just up your game. Why not? And it adds to the feel, and aesthetics are part of it. Or we would all, as we've said hundreds of times in this podcast, we play chip-based games, which I don't mind, I love. But if I'm painting models, putting them on the table with the terrain, quick little hobby purchase like that, and I'm good to go.
Yeah.
Um,
You want to take us off in the scouting report then?
So scouting report, talked about where I was in the alibis, caveats, and piggyback scouting report. I am finishing the bolt action league that's gone on now about 7+ months, is wrapping up. We've got to our 1,000 point games. As with all leagues, we had players drop and come on, throughout. We kind of consistently stayed at plus 20 or so players. At the height, we were at like 32. We're in the low 20s, I think, which is good. That's this whole system has been tested for over a decade. As Windhurst has seen, I get people to come out, play games, build and paint armies, and kind of incentivize that, right? Because that's one of the parts of the hobby that I enjoy, and I want to get more opponents to play. And it's worked out. The only my AAR comment to myself is had a good local group, and the league last year, we had the farthest guy we had come into our league was like Nashville or Murray, like an hour away. And we extended the invite to, far down south as we've had people from Memphis coming, and as far north as like northern Kentucky and in the local area. And it has been awesome, but it has definitely increased the throughput and the analytics that I've had to do with typing up everybody's stuff. I don't know if I would ever go that big again without getting way more help. James Napier up in the 502nd group has been super helpful. He's really the only reason that thing is kept on the rails. And Zach out in Murray has really helped me out. But it still is a lot, right? I'm not getting paid for this league, and I've had to, middle of the night, you'll get scores from people. You'll have to update the calendar and everything else. There is, and I talked James into doing it. He was like, "Hey, I'm gonna do our own league," and I was like, "Why don't you just join ours? And it'll be fun. We'll get to play different people." So that would be my cut against it. But my cut for it is, we've organized game days at different stores throughout the league, and this last league will end at Miso's game room in Louisville, Kentucky, and that has been awesome. We're so dispersed in the states, as you know, Windhurst, and but kind of forcing players to drive or go out of their neck of woods has been just great to meet new people. Met a lot of great people out of all those hobby groups that we've done, and so that would be a cut against and a cut for in the same vein. So that ends here next week. Still, if you're watching my posts, I am about 40 guys away from less than 40 away from being done with my 101st Army. I am grinding on that thing to get done with it this week. I have to have it done before Saturday, because that's when I'll get points for it. So a lot of late nights. You've been seeing me post guys out there at like 1 a.m. and try to, low crawl to bed. So that's a huge thing. I have a buddy here, DC, to not use his real name. He is gotten into Hail Caesar, painted his Romans in like 2 weeks, a month and a half, 2 months ago, and I've always been trying to get my Gauls to face him. I am really going to try to grind on those Gauls. There's no rest for the wicked. And as soon as I get done with these airborne this weekend, I'm going to get back to those Gauls and speed through it. Those are probably my big things. Shows, there's some bolt action tournaments that I'm hosting. The last version 2 tournament called The Last Battle at the end of September here at our local store. We will have version 3 on hand, so it'll be a good way to kind of close out that chapter. There's other tournaments, kind of local tournaments coming up. The November one that the 502nd guys are doing is an early war themed version 2 tournament, which I'm very excited for. It'll have me get one of my early war armies back out on the table. Those guys, I think, will be doing it at the Patton Museum again. They're awesome. They do great tournaments, great events. And really, I'm still flirting with maybe going to a con in the fall. I know there's some that are in my neck of the woods, just kind of filling that out. Not really looking past my goals as far as projects right now. I know me and Windhurst had talked, and I told him, I showed a picture of my NashCon haul, and I bought 3 bags of Persian unarmored archers, and he was like, you have a problem. One of the things I did was I was getting rid of a few painted armies that I don't play with anymore, just didn't have the time and needed to make the space, and so I was like, oh, I'll get rid of one of these armies. And then 2 of those armies I ended up trading for more Harby stuff. One, I'm trading for a bunch of buildings for World War II, which is going to be awesome to make another table. And then the other one, I traded for about 16 bags of Vitrix minis for my Persian army. Andreas Cross, you have been warned. Persia is getting ready somewhere in Asia to beat the crap out of your Greeks and your Thebians and all the other, boy lovers that you guys, the models that you've painted. But I'm really,
2026.
I've had the, yeah, exactly, 2036.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope to really get to that. That army is going to be a lot of fun, and there's so many cool paint styles and stuff I've seen out there. I've already bought some of the Darius and the Chariot from Vindel. Bought some immortals that Vitrix doesn't make, the early Achaemenian Persian mortals. So I really look forward to Ancient. Still has my heart. Version 3 is Bolt Action. Version 3 is really kicking up my love to get to renew in Bolt Action. I don't think it's ever died, but it's kind of competing now. I think Ancients was stealing it after a decade of wargaming World War II, but we'll see as those two compete for my project space. And I'm about 10 meters away from the Napoleonics that I never started, that Windhurst has tried to get me to start to. So a lot of things up as we move to the fall, especially with Market Garden 80. But I look forward to continue to shooting back and forth with Windhurst and him keeping me on track with what I'm going to paint next and how I'm going to get there. But with all that vomit of my mouth, I'll kick it over to you, Windhurst.
Yeah, so I've been really focused on this project for the Air Force, which has a name now. We're calling it Air Force React. And it still is kind of a solo gig. I got mentors who helped me develop it, but I've developed this whole wargaming training toolkit for our wing, and we're trying to push it now Air Force wide. And so what that looks like, I'm actually in September going to be back in the States for a conference, the AFA's Airspace and Cyber Conference Innovation. It's really just a big conference where they bring in a lot of companies and stuff who have products that the Air Force is buying or that they want to sell stuff to the Air and Space Force. But there's also this department that does in-house innovation, and they've asked me to come out and kind of talk about at their booth this project that I'm doing, and that'll hopefully give me some good contacts with leadership and maybe make this, go Air Force wide, which, I think is just leveraging something that I'm passionate about and wargaming and making it available. And, maybe bring more people to the hobby on the back end, which would be awesome. But it's getting me to do something in the hobby, kind of on a professional side a little bit, which is taking up a lot of my time, as my hobby time, that is. On top of that, I demoed it in July at the Riyadh Air Show, which is the world's largest military air show, here at the base I'm stationed at, which was a pretty fun and busy weekend. And it got a lot of showtime with the RAF, and the RAF also kind of really likes this idea. So it might be some cross service stuff going on with our allies. And with the nature of our military lives, I'm looking at less than a year from my next move. So probably May to June next year, I'm going to be PCSing somewhere else in the world. I won't know until probably December, January timeframe. And I'm starting to feel that. So my kind of drive to working on big armies is kind of
Start packing up. Yeah,
exactly.
start
It's
packing up
it's
now.
tempered because now I'm like, okay, if I'm making this or I buy this, it's like what's easier to transport? Stuff still in the box or in the bag, or a painted army? And how am I going to transport these armies? So that's kind of in the back of my mind, and it's kind of affecting how I'm planning these projects. I'm still plugging away on my French Napoleonics because I owe it to the community to do so. Because we raised over $1,000 for multiple scoliosis MS foundation, and so I still want to work on these as as I have the time, and they'll transport easily, so it's like it kind of helps work on those and not feel like I'm adding more stress, because really it's every time we move our big collections across the world, it's stressful because you're worried about how's it going to survive, and most hobbyists don't have to go through this that we have to. So that's now in my mind in the future. So I'm going to keep plugging away on the French, and then we'll see between the Whirlwind Germans or my Ancients, which will get my time. And I'm not even going to mention the other ones that I've said I'd work on that I haven't touched this year, let alone. But yeah, a lot of my hobby focus is towards developing this rule set and this project and rolling it out. And teaching people wargaming and how awesome it can be, and that it can be fun and good for team building and resiliency and stuff like that. But that's what I got for Sky Report. Kentuckian, if you want to sign us off.
Yeah, I just credit to your Air Force project as it goes around, and this is not something like I'm trying to think that the Taliban's listing in right now, so they're like, oh, he's going to be where. These are, the Marines have done it. Windhurst has said that a lot. Like Undaunted, whether it's the board game, there's just good games that show decent, or great principles, from Clausewitz or from wherever, of concentration of firepower and those things. And so for him to equate that and get that down to the airmen or wherever the case may be, that is something that's kind of pretty awesome to see. And the effect of like small unit level, we're not talking anything about an O plan for a country here or something like that. I think those are, pie in the sky type stuff. This is soldiers who touch this and airmen who touch this will, they don't maybe have had the upbringing that historical wargamers have had, or they don't have the pitter patter in their heart. This is going to teach them, I think, good fundamentals, and maybe just like Windhurst had said, you'll find a passion in this hobby. You'll find the ability to kind of go out and get that. And if people, in the military without, can kind of see that and recognize it, I look forward to that project kind of expanding and see how you do it. And I'm very impressed with, all your painting and stuff on it right now is pretty awesome. So look forward to continue to follow that and continue to follow my Airborne and throw shade and comments at me when you're like, hey, it's Wednesday and you're not even where you said you were going to be. But we really appreciate you jumping on here. Hopefully leave us a comment, leave us some other comments about what you think about the rules and what you've heard, what you want us to try to maybe dig into. We're going to do a deep dive on it eventually, but we really like everything that we deep dive. We play, test, and demo and go through the mechanics really heavy to give you that, that feel. And so that's what we want to get out of it when we do a deep dive. Again, like, comment, look at our Facebook pages, continue to share your projects on Patrol, and we look forward to interacting and talking to you guys next time around the campfire here. So we've got I won't let it out of the bag right now, but we've got a good episode teed up to record in probably less than a week. I'm afraid it will fall apart. I'm really hoping it doesn't, because we're having so many people from all over the world jump on here. But yeah, you'll have to wait and see to what that is. So until next time, grab your spear, your shield, your musket, your belt-fed machine gun, or your order dice, and join us on the next On Patrol. All right, FK out.